Hey everyone, this is James from the DevGenie Academy, and welcome to the 3D Game Engine series, episode 2. In this episode we'll be rendering a window to the screen. First of all, what you're going to want to do is create a new package. I'm going to call mine com.devgenie.core. In that core package, let's create a new class called Window Manager. And in the Window Manager we need to create 3 constant variables. These are going to be used for future tutorials, but it's nice to get them out of the way first. The first one is FOV, field of view. Next we need to create a z-near and a z-far. Some of the main variables is a string title, an int of the width and height, and also a long for the window. We'll also need 2 boolean variables, a resize and a vsync. Another variable for the future will be a matrix 4f, which is a projection matrix. After those variables are set, let's create a constructor which consists of the title, the width, the height, and the vsync. Also in the constructor, make sure you call project matrix equals a new matrix 4f, just so you can stop the errors from showing up. We'll also need a public void init method, where we can create an error callback, so that if we do have any issues, we can get a little bit more information. We also need to initialize the GLFW, so we can actually check to see if that hasn't been initialized. After we've initialized GLFW, we need to set some defaults for the window. So one of the first things we need to do is set a window hint for the visibility. Initially, we're not going to be wanting to making the window visible, so we're going to be setting this to false. Another window hint we can set is whether the window is resizable. So for now, we'll set this to true, but later on we may decide to turn this off and do the resizing a little bit different. So that's GLFW resizable and GLFW true. The next window hint we can create is a GLFW context version major. So this is the recommended version, it's not going to be the absolute version. And I want to set my major version to 3 and the minor version to 2. Another window hint we might want to use is GLFW OpenGL profile. And this is telling OpenGL which profile to use. And we're going to go with the core profile, however you can use any profile as well as an alternative. We also want to set the open forward compatibility to true, so that means that any functions that are deprecated in the current version of OpenGL will also be deprecated in the code. So next up we want to make a boolean maximized, will be initialized to false, but we can set this to true if either the width or the height has been set to 0, in which case what we're going to do is we're going to be setting width and height to 100 just so there's something there, and also we'll set the window hint of GLFW maximized, we'll set that to true. Make sure to use the glfw.glfw underscore true value as opposed to the GL11GL true value we used earlier. And also, again, we can set that maximized to true. We'll use that variable later on when we try and center the window to the screen. Obviously, if it's maximized, we don't need to do that. So next up, we need to create the window, and the parameters we need to pass in is a width, height, a title. We need to use a memoryutil.null, not a standard null, a memoryutil null. And we can check to see if window is null by again using memoryutil.null, and if it's null, we can throw an error, so throw new runtime exception, and we can also notify the user that it failed to create a GLFW window. Next up, we can set a frame buffer size callback, which takes in a window as a parameter and outputs parameters window, width, and height. So inside of this method, we pass in the window and we get the window, the width, and the height. That's if the window has been resized, we can then get the updated values of width and height. So what we're going to do is we're going to say this.width equals width, this.height equals height. We can also set resize to true, but we need to create getters and setters for that first. After this, we can then set a key callback, and again we pass in the window as a parameter. We get out the window, the key, the scan code, the action, and also the mods. With these variables that we're getting out of the callback, we can check to see if the key escape key has been pressed. So if the escape key has been pressed and the action of GLF released, then we know that we can set the window should close to true. Because what we're going to be doing is if the escape key is pressed, then we want to notify OpenGL that the window should close. So the next thing we need to do is if we are maximized, then we just do glfw.maximizeWindow and we pass the window in as a parameter. If that's not the case, however, we want to get the window centered in the screen. And we can do this by creating a vid mode. So we get the video mode itself, and we also get the primary monitor, which is this screen that we're using, you can see right now. So after that, we can then set the window position to be, obviously you need to pass in the window because we need to know what we're positioning. Well, for the X position, we can do vidmode.width negative our window width, and then we can divide that by 2. And we can do the same with the height as well. So we do vidmode.height negative the height and divide that by 2 as well. And that will put the window right in the center of the screen. So the next thing we can do is set the current context to be the window, and after that we can then deal with the vsync. So if we are using vsync, which we'll need getters and setters again, we can then do the swap intervals method, and we just pass in a number 1 as a parameter. After this, we can finally show the window to the user by passing the window value in as a parameter. We then need to create the capabilities, and after this we can then use the function clearColor, which just sets the initial color of the window. I'm going to set this all initially to 0s, so the screen will be black initially. So after that we can then enable some further parameters. We can do a depth test and a stencil test. These two parameters again won't be used until much later on in the series, but it's nice to get them out of the way and ready right now. We can also set a cull face and cull the back face of all objects rendered. For example, if we go inside of an object, the inside of that object won't be rendered because it's not needed, it's not visible, and we won't be seen. Obviously, there will be some instances where some objects will be needed to be rendered, so we'll need to handle that differently as we get to that. We now need to create an update method where we call swap buffers again, but instead of passing an integer, we pass that window through as a parameter. Next up, we also need to call GLFW poll events. Now this is important because this is what tells OpenGL to start rendering all the objects we've placed currently in a queue. Next up, we can create a cleanup method, which is just simply a GLFW destroy window with the window as a parameter. We can also set the clearColor function, which passes in the 3 color components red, green and blue, but also the alpha value as well. If we want to check for other keystrokes elsewhere in the system, we can do a isKeyPressed function, and we can pass in the GLFW getKey function, which passes in the window, a key code, and also checks to see if that key has been pressed. It returns it as a boolean. We also need a window should close function, so that if we are using an infinite while loop for our game engine, the game engine has something to draw back on if it needs to stop. So we can also do a set title, but this needs to be done in a slightly different way because we can't just do this.title equals title. We need to do a glfw.set window title first, and that will update the window with the new title. And we can do getters for the width, the height, and the window and the projection matrix as well. And finally, we need to do 2 further functions relating to the projection matrix. It's worthwhile to get them out of the way now because then the window manager class is pretty much done on the first attempt. So we get the aspect ratio of width and height, we have to cast that to a float, and then all we do is return the projection matrix and a function called setPerspective, where we pass in the field of view, the aspect ratio, the z-near and the z-far. And we can do a similar function where we do another update projection matrix, but this time instead of using the current projection matrix, we're going to be passing in another projection matrix with a width and a height. So again, we can just copy that aspect ratio through, then we can return matrix.setPerspective with the field of view, the aspect ratio, the Z near, and the Z far. And that should do the window manager. So back in the launcher class, we can now create an instance of that window manager. So window manager window equals a new window manager. We need to pass in a title. I'm going to pass mine as LWJGL engine. I'm going to pass the width of 1600 and 900 for the height, and false for the vsync. First thing we need to do is make sure that window is initialized, so we can call a window.init method, and then while the window should not close, basically, we need to call window.update. And finally, after all of that's been done, we need to make sure to clean it up, so we call window.cleanup at the end. So now launching that, we should have a blank window opening to the screen with the title at the top left hand corner. And we can close the application by pressing the escape key on our keyboard. And we can also check to see if maximize is working. So by setting width and or height to 0, we can now see that the window has rendered full screen. So thanks very much for watching, everyone. Next week we'll be looking at the engine manager. If you do have any questions, please drop them down in the comments below. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next week.